Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. We're checking out another MSI Z590 board. This time it's the MEG Z590 Ace. It's got Thunderbolt 4, it's got chunky heat sinks, but as usual with our motherboard content, this is not a review. Let's get right into it. As usual with our motherboard content, this video is not a review, it's just an overview so we can take a look at all the things on the board, where everything is, and what physically comes in the box when you buy a brand new motherboard. So without further ado, I'm gonna talk a little bit more, but not with my face to the camera, so let's check it out. Alright ladies and gents, it's time to check out the MSI MEG Z590 Ace. It's a very interesting board with dual Thunderbolt 4, but first we need to get that motherboard out of the way so we can take a closer look at everything that is in the box with this brand new board. Are you ready? Strap yourselves in, it's time to take a look at this. The first thing, it's the antenna for the built-in Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.0. Next up, we've got all of the RGB cables. Now there's some adapter cables, there's some extension cables, and just general RGB goodness right here in the box. There's also this. Now this is a thermal probe. I've explained this in many motherboard overviews in the past, but you put this in any part of your case and it will tell you the temperature wherever the end of this sensor is. There's also two sets of SATA cables or SATA cables for your 2.5-inch SSDs or your spinning rush drives. There's also a DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort adapter for pass-through for Thunderbolt. So you can pass your discrete GPU through to the Thunderbolt controller on the motherboard, and then you can plug in a Thunderbolt display straight into your PC. There's also 2021's greatest advent in motherboard technology: no more discs, more USB sticks. I can definitely get on board with that. There's also a set of M.2 screws for the 4 M.2 slots on this board, which I'm going to explain how this works a little bit later on in the video as usual. There's also this. Now this is a little brush. It goes out to either side with a different type of brush, but it's basically for cleaning out dust inside of your PC. There's also the screwdriver set that MSI started to include with their other Z590 boards. I think this is kind of cool, but yeah, could be dangerous on your keyring. Just be careful there. There's a whole stack of documentation with this board. This one says, this product was created with great passion and we hope you could enjoy it. I hope I could enjoy it too. Now the QR codes that I'm showing on all of this documentation literally just points to a website. They're not individual to these at all. This is the quick installation guide. This will help you socket a CPU if you've never done it before. There's also this new product catalog. This will just show you some of their latest products if you're interested in that kind of thing. There's also the user guide. The user guide is really handy for building if you've never built or you've built lots of times. It tells you where stuff is in the BIOS and where stuff is on the board. There's also these new stickers, which I'm kind of digging. They're to label cables for your RGB and your SATA or SATA drives, as well as the sheet of battery stickers, which is pretty standard for like Asus TUF boards and ROG boards, but it's nice that MSI is kind of coming to the table for people who want to customize a bit more. And there's this, the MSI badge, that'll give you 18 billion frames per second in Fortnite at 16K with ray tracing turned on. Only a joke, guys. Alright, unsheathing time. Alright, you guys ready to see what's on this bad boy? Let's take a bit of a closer look at the MSI MEG Z590 Ace. First up, we've got the front panel audio connector. There is a 4-pin 12-volt RGB header, a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB header. There's 3 PWM fan connectors. And next to those 3 PWM fan connectors, we have an additional PCIe power for providing some extra juice to the slot. There's also 2 USB 2.0 headers for things like RGB controllers and all-in-one liquid coolers. They tend to use those these days. There's an LED switch for turning off the RGB and a BIOS switch. There's also a power and a reset button if you're like using this on a test bench or whatnot to see if it turns on. Look at that. Power button on, reset button on. And there's a front panel connector for all your lights and all your switches. There's an additional PWM fan connector on the right hand side of the board as well. There's 6 SATA or SATA connectors for your 2.5-inch SSDs, all those old spinning rush drives. There's also a right-angled USB 3.0 header, which I like. I like right-angle connectors. They don't work in every case, but I do actually find them quite useful. There's a USB Type-C front panel header connector as well. There's a 24-pin power connector to send all the juice to your brand new Z590 Ace. If we move up a bit, there's a little diagnostic LED array. This is like the postcode screen, but it's not actually the postcode screen. There's also these little solder points for probes if you're doing LN2 overclocking on the bench. It's actually very handy for that. There's also an additional PWM fan connector. Right up the top on the right hand side of the board, there is a postcode LED readout screen. Across the top of the board, we've got another 3-pin 5V addressable RGB header. We've got a Corsair RGB header, 2 PWM fan connectors, and 2 8-pin EPS power connectors to send juice to that brand new 11th gen Rocket Leg CPU. The PCIe layout on this board is a little bit different to the other Z590 boards that we've seen so far. The top slot is a by 16 Gen 4 slot, the middle one is a by 8 Gen 4 slot, and the one right at the bottom is a by 8 Gen 3 slot. There's also 2 by 1 Gen 3 slots as well. So the layout is quite different, but they've done this because if you wanted to use SLI with Gen 4, you can do that, although SLI is basically dead at this point, like we know that. But yeah, it is a nice to have feature. This board obviously features Intel's brand new Z590 chipset, and here's the chipset cover right here. It's got this mesh kind of design on it. It looks kind of like a screen door, but it's kind of cool. I dig it. For the VRM layout, you're looking at a 16-phase digital direct VRM layout with 90 amp power stages. And you can see that those heat sinks are quite thick and there's a heat pipe connecting both of them. Now, as usual that we've seen with most of these Z590 boards, there is a heatsink underneath the I/O cover, and there's also one towards the top of the board to help with cooling as well. Because this is a Z590 board, it does feature Intel's LGA 1200 socket with standard Intel cooler mounting. So nothing special going on here in terms of the motherboard itself. But if we flip the board over, you'll see that it's got a backplate that covers most of the board, and we've seen this with less MSI boards over time, but the higher end boards typically have this, and we'll just zoom in just to clarify this once again. It does have an AMD Crossfire logo on the back. Most MSI Intel boards do have this logo. It's nothing fishy going on here, guys. For RAM, there's 4 DDR4 RAM slots which support a total of 128 gigs at 5600 megahertz overclocked. Alright, let's take the M.2 heatsinks off so we can take a closer look at the M.2 layout on this board. It's not as exciting as you would think it is with this many M.2 slots. What they've done here is they've opted for the top slot to be PCIe Gen 4 only. The other slots are PCIe Gen 3, and the bottom one is SATA or SATA as well. So it's a bit of a sacrifice you're making here. I thought that they might have 2 Gen 4 slots like we saw with the ROG Strix Z590E. I'm not sure if that's a deal breaker for you or not. Anyways, each of the slots, as usual, shows you what they're compatible with, and this is an example of the top slot and saying it's wired directly into the CPU, so you do get that Gen 4 speed right there. For rear I/O, we've got a clear CMOS and a BIOS flashback button. We've got a bunch of USB 3.2 ports. There's actually quite a bit of USB on this board. There's also an HDMI 2.0 port towards the bottom. There's the now standard 2.5 gigabit Ethernet and some more USB ports. But here's where it gets interesting. There's 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, right, with mini DisplayPort pass-through if you wanted to use some Thunderbolt displays. There's also antenna connectors for the Wi-Fi 6E and 7.1 digital surround sound with optical and SPDIF output. Alright, the guys at Peel Corp have been really busy lately, so let's keep them more busy with some good old school gear seekers peeling. Alright, look at that. We're seeing some really nice textures on a lot of these Z590 boards. It's interesting that the design's going this way. I say bring it on. And speaking of bringing it on, bring on cinematic mode. Alright ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this first look and overview of the MSI MEG Z590 Ace. Now this board's got a few little cool features up its sleeve that I thought was actually worth noting and worth talking about at the end. Dual Thunderbolt 4 with DisplayPort pass-through. That's really, really handy. Supports up to 8K displays through that Thunderbolt port. It's true 40 gigabit Thunderbolt as well, which is also very nice. One thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting, even for a desktop board, and when I say this, I mean comparing to an HEDT board. We got a couple comments with people thinking I was comparing it to a laptop, but no, I was comparing it to high-end workstation desktop boards, whereas like these are just regular consumer desktop boards. So anyway, it's got 2 PCIe by 8 slot. Also, the middle by 8 slot is PCIe Gen 4. However, I thought that they might have done an ASUS with this board and given us 2 Gen 4 M.2 slots, but they haven't here, which is okay as well, because most people will only use one with a desktop board, and you're also taking up PCIe lanes with that stuff as well. But the Thunderbolt to me is the standout feature. Obviously, we're going to be doing a build. We're going to take a deeper dive and a close look at this board when we can use CPUs. We need to use an 11th gen Rocket Lake CPU to use most of the features that make this board different to the Z490 Ace, which if we just quickly pull out of the box here, which I've got just conveniently, it's sitting right next to me on the shelf. But what I've actually noticed is some of the Z590 boards are almost refreshed versions of the Z490, but as you can see here with the Z490 Ace, they're completely different. There's almost no similarity in the design whatsoever. So yeah, brand new design. Then even the back plate on this one is smaller, and just everything on the Z490 compared to the Z590 is actually completely different. So it is nice to see that MSI is doing stuff differently compared to some of the other boards that we've seen with Z590 being mainly refreshes to the Z490 counterparts. As I mentioned in all these motherboard videos, this is not a review. Like, this is just me giving you a quick comparison between the two boards just at face value, because some people do ask, like, what's the difference between the Z490 and Z590, or this generation and another generation? And yeah, I think that's just a nice and quick and dirty way to give you an idea of what's different. Anyways, guys, as far as pricing and availability, I think they should be available sometime in the next few weeks, according to the stuff that I found online. In terms of pricing, I could only find US pricing. They're gonna go for around $489 US when these things finally launch, and that's just about gonna do it for us. If you enjoyed the music you heard here, I make all the music. It's available over on Patreon. If you wanna get early access to videos just like this one right here, over on Floatplane. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peak where you seek. And can I just say, can we please just see more Thunderbolt on desktop boards? Just do it, just bring more Thunderbolt. I mean, I don't use it, but just bring it anyway. Some people use it. For music production, it's really, really good. For storage, it's really, really good. Just more Thunderbolt. I like the name too, Thunderbolt. It's like Thor. I don't know, why am I weird? Thanks for watching. Or not watching. I'm just weird. Thanks for being you.
You're welcome.